Welcome to Outer Space, International Arts and Class Struggle Podcast.
To be a leader of their people. An interview with the family of international brigadista David Newman. Hello, I'm Rob MacDonald and I am your host for Outer Space International Arts and Class Struggle podcast. This podcast is part of a series of podcasts that we are doing related to the historical memory of the Spanish Civil War, particularly the Solidarity Park project. So we're going to be talking to lots of artists involved in that project. What are their reasons to be involved? How do they see the fight against fascism and the far right today? But also their general political outlook, and touching on many of the questions that the podcast normally talks about. We're also going to make a bit of investigation into the role of women in the struggle for the historical memory today, the recuperation of the memory. We'd also like to thank the Diputació de Barcelona and Amical, the International Brigadistas Association in Catalonia, for their support in this project. Okay, let's go to the podcast. Well, hello. Today we're joined by Mark and Mo Newman, and Mark is the son of David Newman, who was one of the international brigaders on the ship, the Ciudad de Barcelona. How are you both?
Well, we're fine, enjoying some sunshine after last week's miserable weather. Slightly warmer, but the worst is yet to come, I suspect. But we're fine. We're absolutely fine.
Very good. I'm very pleased you could join us. What we want to talk about today, Mark, is your dad's life. David Newman. I think maybe these podcasts are going out around the Solidarity Park project, and we're talking to as many families and artists and people involved as we can. And obviously we're building a monument and this kind of stuff. But what the project's also really about is not only is finding out all we can about the historical memory, about the people involved. So today, obviously, we're going to talk about your dad. So thank you for coming on and doing that and explaining what you're going to.
Pleasure.
Just give me a minute because I have got something on my computer which is not very good as the host. And okay, so could you give us an idea of who your dad was before the Spanish Civil War, his childhood, where he came from? What was the family background?
Sure. He was born in Edmonton, in North London, and my mum's parents were born there as well. And he grew up in a socialist family. His father was extremely left, unlike my mum's mother, who was right. She would be appalled at what's happening at the moment, but there you go. But David went to grammar school, went to Latimer in Edmonton, as did my mum, and that's where they met, although it didn't amount to anything until many years later. And then when he left school, he basically became a local government officer working for the Edmonton Borough Council, as it would have been then. And it's interesting to note, really, that apart from Spain, he stayed in local government for the whole of his life. But we can come on to that if you wish. Yeah. And so when the Spanish War started, he was in actual fact working in local government in Edmonton, and the rest, as they say, is history, really, as far as he was concerned.
So he was, when you say a local government worker, do you know what exactly was he doing with that? What was his job as such?
Yeah, well, he was a clerk with the Edmonton Council, doing exactly what we don't know, but he certainly was working for Edmonton Council. Yeah.
And how old was he just before he left for Spain?
Well, he was born in 1915. So
he was 21 when the war started.
21, yes.
Okay, so he was a young guy, a very young guy. I mean, the fact that he had a job as a clerk in the council, that was his first job. He'd only really just started that, surely.
That's right. And it's interesting because some years ago, for the first time, I realised, I must have been about 40, 45, I suppose, and I realised just how young he was and how many of the brigaders were. I mean, quite extraordinary.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, when you think about it properly, you realise they were young, but initially you don't think that, do you? You think people they would be a little bit older, but no, 21. So anything else about his background? I mean, you say he came in a socialist family, and was he already an activist?
I don't think so. We don't think so.
No, it's very difficult because he died so young. The sort of questions that might have been asked of him, then you never had the opportunity to do that. I mean, Mark was only 19 when his dad died. Right. So as a rampant teenager with a guitar.
He was stroppy teenager.
He was hardly interested in what his dad had been doing 10 years before or 20 years before. Yeah. And so I think it was sad that happened because it was only through his writings that, and certainly, of course, I never knew him, but certainly through his writings that we actually began to piece together the story, didn't we?
Yeah.
Right. So in some ways you had to do your own historical investigation.
Apart from the fact that we found, because we had these letters that you've heard about, which were Mark's mother found out that David had gone to Spain, and she wrote to him just as an ex-school friend. They'd both been in the drama club together, and she'd known him from that. And she wrote to him when he was actually, by then, he was out at the front, wasn't he? He'd left. Yeah. So he'd already gone through the whole thing.
So explain these letters a little bit for listeners. So they were letters from his mum?
Well, we need to go back a bit, I think.
Okay.
Because one Friday night, he went to Edmonton Green. It's all very different now. And he went to Edmonton Green, and there was a meeting, a Communist Party meeting going on. And it was being addressed by Jack Reed. And after the meeting, David went to talk to him about Spain. Jack Reed was obviously not, I don't think recruiting is the right word, but he was certainly bringing the war to the attention of people. And from that, David decided that he would go to Spain. His parents were not happy about that, and Jack Reed told him where to go in order that he could join, but doubted whether he would be able to because he had no military experience. Anyway, he told his then girlfriend, Claire, what he was going to do, and she persuaded him to delay for 24 hours, as a result of which the recruits from Edmonton and from London, or some of them anyway, had already departed for Spain, and David literally missed the boat. And I don't mean Ciudad de Barcelona, but that's
no, unfortunately.
But anyway, what happened? The following day, he decided he would go, and he went to a meeting in London and was told that the British contingent had gone, but if he wanted to, he could go join the American battalion. And it's an interesting sort of what would have happened had he gone with the English battalion English group rather than the Americans. Anyway,
because there are some English on the boat, the Ciudad de Barcelona, but there's a lot of Americans, so that would make sense.
Oh yeah, very much so.
It was the American.
And he went to Paris and was told not to say anything to anybody, police and all that, and to get himself was told how to get into Spain. The frontier between France and Spain was closed. So instead of going over the border, presumably on foot or maybe with a bit of luck by bus or coach or whatever, he made his way with others back to Marseille, and there met up with more Abe Osheraf.
No, so they went.
Yeah.
He went with
them. Yeah,
there were a few of them went together. Abe Osheraf was one, and Red, and there was a group of them, and they met up with the others there. But then they met up with there were Danes and there were Finns and there were all the rest that were gathering for the boat.
Anyway, and they got on. They got their passage, as it were, on the Ciudad de Barcelona.
So as far as you know, then, I mean, just to recap, it's quite. So basically, he's not particularly, as far as you know, very active. Probably doing a bit, obviously, an interest in the world events. And he goes to,
Claire was. Claire was the daughter of the local Communist Party secretary. He was the secretary.
So we're piecing together here what was going on. He was around the Communist Party, whether he was in them or not. His girlfriend's parents were. He went to the meetings. He got inspired. He obviously had a political outlook, and then he makes the decision. Absolutely. I mean, what do you think made him think? What do you think? What was the trigger? Because there's a lot of socialists and there's a lot of activists, and they didn't all go. And what do you think was the trigger for him? Do you have any idea?
I would think one of the main things would be that there was a rebellion against a democratically elected government. I think if it had been in England, he would have fought against rebels, if you like. And I suspect quite sincerely that it was because the war was extremely nasty, and the Republicans needed all the help that they could get. And
he was very much into democracy.
Oh, very.
And in his later writing, he talks to his to-be wife eventually, to Kathleen and the family, and he talks about the horrors of it and the way that this fascist army should be destroyed. That really powerfully felt that came through.
So it was a question of democracy. I mean, some people it's because they were already involved in certain politics or they were trade unionist always. But you think he had this sort of vision of how a democratic world might work, or at least he was against the injustices.
Sure.
Okay, so we have
very much.
He was
very, very fond of trade unions, so that was a big thing.
Yeah,
you
said his family was socialist already. Yeah, you said you came from a socialist.
Yeah, his father was one of the early members of the Labour Party, but again, we don't know the details about that. We know that he was. So that would have immediately. He worked for the council. But he worked in a labouring job, and he was probably a big influence in that in the home, I would think. Yeah. I mean, you come to politics yourself, don't you? But it makes it easier if you like. For me, my parents are left wing, and so there was a natural progression there. I didn't have to, not a lot was thought for me, but it was all there to be looked at very quickly. Okay, so we have David, your dad, who was he went to a Jack Reed meeting about the Communist Party. His girlfriend at the time was related to the Communist Party people, and so we have this sort of thing. He decides to go, and he talked about his trip. I mean, do you know much about the trip from sort of Edmonton to the border? Do you know much about that?
Paris, and then by train. We know he was in Carcassonne, and he stayed at the Hotel Buissonnière, which is still there.
Okay.
But unfortunately, 5 years ago, when we first came down to Malgrat, the hotel was more or less in the state that it had been for decades. It then became, sadly, the basis for a chocolatier, and it was all neon and chrome downstairs. Horrible how they got planning permission in Carcassonne.
A chocolatier, isn't that where you have chocolate, is it? That bit sounds right to me. I'm not into the chrome, but...
What a design. What a design.
But it ruined the place.
Anyway, they then found that they couldn't get over the border into Spain from France. Okay. And so they made their way back to Marseille and met up with the others.
Yeah, because you're kind of coming across there, aren't you? Because if you're Carcassonne, you're straight down, and then you're over the Pyrenees probably somewhere. Right. But if you're going over to Marseille, it's actually quite a long way, isn't it? Going, what would that be, going east?
It is a long way.
Yeah. It'd be going east,
yeah. It's a long way.
And we've never found out how, we've tried, but we haven't yet found out how they made that journey from Carcassonne back to Marseille. I mean, the first bit, going to Lyon, was by train. But after that, we've lost that one. We haven't got anything yet. We keep looking.
Probably by train, I would guess.
Possibly by train. It was a long journey, as you
Anyway,
said.
They got the boat in, they picked up the boat, or the boat picked them up in Marseille.
Okay, and he'd already at this point joined up with a number of other brigadistas. So obviously he's making friends at that stage because he leaves on his own, not with the British battalion. So maybe he knew people in that, but he doesn't go with them.
No. And he joined the Lincoln Brigade.
Okay, so
he stayed with them for a long time.
Okay, so there he is on the boat with the guys.
Was the Americans.
Yeah.
So
as we know, no, go on, you carry on.
No, his experience on the boat. I was thinking, maybe you could recall some of that.
No, we don't know, and he never wrote it down, which is sad. But we have his memoirs, but they don't include anything about the trip. Unlike Jack Freeman, who put his recollections
he wrote a letter
down.
to his
David. We don't.
Why do you think that is? Do you think that's just something's being lost, or because he did write things, he was a communicator of sorts, eh? He wasn't a quiet man necessarily.
Very much so. No, I don't think it's been lost. I don't think he ever did it.
Right.
Like so many people who are involved in wars, they're reluctant to talk about their wartime experiences. Now, if I had more nous when I was a teenager, or if David had died many years later, the probability is that I would have found out by talking to him. I'd probably be more intelligent by then, I would think.
Who knows?
But no, there is no record. There is no record of the trip at all. Nothing about Malgrat.
There is one point about that. When we started the research on it, we only had the letters, which we can come to later, but they start for us at the point where David's already in the headquarters contingent with Jim Jump, and when he gets the first letter, he's actually at the front. So we've a few letters before that, which we got from Mark's cousin, which are written home to his sister and to his mum and dad, but they're fairly sparse. And they don't say anything at all. None of them say anything about what happened before he went to Tarazona, which he did to join up Albacete, in fact. And what we got was years and years and years later, Chris, Mark's brother, was clearing the attic, and he found some boxes, and he was going to put them in the recycling bin, and rang Mark and said, I've found this stuff. It's Kathleen's old stuff. Do you want it? Because I know you've got a lot of family history stuff. Do you want it? Or shall I bin it? I'm going to put it in the recycling centre. And Mark said, oh, for goodness sake, don't do that. Keep it. And when we come back, we'll pick it up. We did. But in the meantime, we moved, and then moved again. And these boxes stayed put. And it was only out here that we opened the boxes to find out that, in fact, the very first piece of paper on the top starts off, I was born in Edmonton in 1915, and it goes on, and there's just a page, and it's obviously he's beginning to think about writing his story. Right. So we know that has to have been a long time afterwards. And then when we got further into it, there was a folder full of his handwritten and later some typed ones, but handwritten story about this journey and about what happened, and right the way up to the boat.
Okay, so
we've got
probably
that story.
Probably had it in mind, but never came to it. I mean, maybe
probably.
Yeah, maybe it sheds also some light. Explain what actually happened to him on the boat, because I mean, he wasn't in a position to be writing straight after it, was he? I mean, maybe explain what.
No, he wasn't. He was ill. Well, all we know is the journey. Mark found a document at the where were you?
Oh, the Mark's Memorial
Library. And on a tiny piece of paper with 7 names written on it. One was David, and the other 5 we knew from the other documentation. And these were the Americans who were with him. And somebody had been trying to find out who was on the boat and who survived. And these were survivors. And they were taken to the hospital in Malgrat. And the next thing we've got is where he's written a letter to home, and he's already at Albacete signing up.
But
the gap is there because he was ill. He was very ill.
This is what I'm sort of alluding to, really, because I mean, with the experience of different people on the boat, some obviously died immediately, some jumped in the sea, some there was different accounts and different stories.
He was thrown into the water.
But we know that
we know he was thrown into. Oh, sorry.
He was quite unwell after
delay.
it,
sorry.
I mean, that's the point I'm coming to. He was quite unwell after it. He didn't come off unshaved. He came off in a bad state. And I believe he spent time in hospital immediately after, did you say in Margrat, but did he not go to Mataró, or was it in Santa Coloma or something like that, I believe?
No, that was much later, wasn't it?
Santa Coloma was much later, much later. Okay. And it was the sinking of the boat and the ingesting of rubbish that finally killed him years later. But we can come on to that if you want. And you need to bear in mind that, of course, that my mum found out long after he'd gone that he'd actually gone to Spain. And she then wrote to him, and that is the beginning of the correspondence between my father and my mum.
That's your father and your mum, or his mum?
No, my mother.
Okay.
Kathleen.
If you refer to Kathleen, that's my mother.
Okay. But you're saying he started to write these letters where she didn't know he'd gone to Spain?
She didn't know that he'd gone to Spain, and she wrote to him.
Okay.
And the correspondence began. And this is the correspondence, all of it that we have. And a lot of it is in the book. So the relationship between them, if you like, clearly started while he was in Spain.
Okay, I mean, tell me if I'm correct about this, because I'm just trying to get it right so I understand perfectly. He has a girlfriend who wasn't your mum, just beforehand, and then he goes off to Spain, and then he starts or he starts off this correspondence, and another one blossoms. So I'll just sort of clarify. There's two different people here. We're talking about. Okay.
We don't know about Claire. What happened to Claire? I think she
may have found the letters.
He had Ivy.
And then the relationship. If you read the letters over a relatively short period, the relationship developed very quickly, and she was sending him things and so on and so forth. So there you are.
He was actually at the front when they were building up to the Ebro, when the letter from her arrived. And we've still got that letter and the letter he replied to her with. And that, of course, was a fairly short period. That was in end of March, beginning of April. And but we've got letters that he was writing to his sister before that. We got from Mark's cousin, and that tells us more about what was going on at headquarters when he was working, because he was working as a translator.
Okay, yeah. So let's try and create a time of what he did. So he has the Ciudad de Barcelona. He's in hospital in Margaret, and then where does he go next? Where do you pick up?
Albacete.
Okay, so you pick him up at Albacete, and then that's when the information
Albacete.
you really know more about him from that point on, yeah, because of all these letters.
That's right, absolutely.
So he goes to Albacete. What happened? Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say all we've got from Albacete is actually his documentation there, where he's signed up, because they were then taken to Tarazona to headquarters, and that's where he was placed then to do the work.
Okay,
he was very good at languages. So,
so he had a language ability, and so what work did he do? What was he assigned to do?
A translator, and also as he was an observer as well.
Okay,
and we have letters where he describes going out to spy upon people.
Not quite. He's trying to find placements.
Yeah.
But he was also working as a press secretary with Jim Jupp. The two of them were doing press releases and translations for press releases, which we think would have suited him right down to the ground. And then they were also training him, because he'd no training whatsoever in military things. And they were training him how to use a gun and how to behave in an army, basically.
He starts off with the skills he's got as a clerk and with language, and they slot him. He turns up late from the English Brigade. He joins the Lincoln Brigade, and they slot him in as a translator, as an observer, as a writer of things, a communicator. I mean, one of the things that we found, I'm sure you remember, is we found a communication a year later about the Ciudad de Barcelona, which was written in the internal bulletins of the brigades about the Ciudad de Barcelona, saying that we should do a memorial on the beach, which is what we're doing. So those kind of things, he was writing them, or he was assigned to do them, and the communications side of things. So that kept him out the firing line for the short time. But you're saying that they were training him up in the meantime. Okay. So what happened to him after that?
Well, I mean, again, a fairly short time. The relationship with my mum was developing quite clearly, and he became in 38. He became very, very unwell. He missed the Ebro, the actual battle itself, because he was very ill with typhoid, and it was from there that he was first in hospital in Barcelona, and then was transferred to Santa Coloma.
Okay, so he had typhoid.
And he was very ill. And Clinic Militar number 5, Santa Coloma.
But he was taken to the field hospital at Santa Lucha, which we've been to at Bisbal. That's the one where the nurses were and the doctors on the field, and they did take the wounded from the Ebro itself, but both sides. They didn't just take one side, and any civilians who were damaged were also taken there, and that's the one that's in the cave in the valley. And from there, he was then taken to Barcelona. He was very, very ill. He said he could have died easily if they hadn't saved him at that field hospital.
So then he doesn't go to the Ebro, which is, I went to the reenactment of the Ebro the other week, and it's quite a fierce battle. So he ends up in Santa Coloma Hospital, and from there, he makes his passage back.
That was when he went from there. And that was when the large number of British brigaders were repatriated, and he was one of them.
In the December, beginning of December.
In December, wasn't it?
1937.
And 38. And he went by train up through France. And the interesting thing is here that although we can't prove it, the chances are he came from Ripoll through the mountains and probably came up the valley up to Toulouse and up through Cahors, which is very close to where we live now, of course.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
We don't know that for sure, but it's a nice thought that he may have been there.
May pass by your house.
And not quite, but we need a high-speed line coming through Montcuq. That's right. But anyway, and he went from there and left Spain and came up and came back to England. Obviously, went. So
he was there approximately 18 months. Would you say?
About 18 months. Yeah.
Yeah. So he sees a lot. I mean, he experiences a lot, and he experiences it from a quite not just from one front. He's behind in that sense. He's seeing probably the toings and fro-ins. He must have had a fairly good idea of what was going on in general, on the Republican side.
Absolutely.
So these letters that he's writing. Oh, sorry. No, these letters that he's writing to your mum in this period. It's all about that kind of thing, is it?
Oh yeah, and we have. There's one lovely thing where he's sent out to observe, and was that when they caught rabbits or something?
To feed them because the soldiers were starving.
They caught rabbits and took them back to be demolished, as it were. And yes, so
he also wrote a very interesting one before they got up into the Ebro region. They were working their way across. And he describes very, very closely the bombing raid that he's caught in, and that we were very sort of thought of that when we were at Corbera and then one or two of the other places, Gandesa and so on. We don't know just where he was at that moment, but certainly we've been to those places, and you can still feel it. It's really a powerful. Memorial is Corbera and Belchite as well.
Yeah, he'd been much affected, of course, by reports. This is going back a long way now. By Guernica, and the fact is the fact that Germany and Italy became involved very early on. So yeah, I mean,
he was writing about it. Sorry, we've got this pause. Yeah. He was writing about the fact that. He was seeing it then as a preamble, a beginning of a world war. He was actually aware of the European.
Yeah, because this is one of the interesting things about the brigadistas, isn't it? Because they were advanced. I mean, they were part of the advanced people that knew what was going on. They understood the seriousness of the world developments that were going on, and therefore they interjected. They were socialists, they were communists, they were radicals, they were anarchists, they were people who had put a lot of thought into how society was developing, and the lights were there. If we can stop this one, if we can win this one, then we can change the course of history. And goodness me, if they had, we'd be living first of all in a different world, and also there'd be a lot less deaths in the Second World War. So quite heroic just on that level. Yeah, I'm interested, just as a side, what about his mum? And his parents, what was their knowledge and about what he was doing? I mean, you say that
you can answer that better than I can.
Well, not really. Well, at the time when Kathleen got in touch with Mark, with David, she was an actor. She'd had drama at school, which is how she'd met David. And then she became a professional actor. And so she was actually home from resting, shall we say. And she met Mark's dad's older sister, who told her about Spain. So she wrote to him from there. Now, Kathleen's family were very much extreme right. I'm not going to say extreme right, but certainly right.
They were conservatives.
They were conservatives. And she had to keep it secret that she had this connection with this extreme left-wing bloke, And it did eventually lead to some quite horrendous periods for them. But it was, at the time, it was just a correspondence. So it was less of
like
an
a
issue.
pen pal, right, to somebody on the front kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I didn't know that happened as such. I mean, was that an organised thing, or was that just something she picked up because she met the older sister and was like, okay, I'll write to him then if he's out there?
Yes, basically that's
like
exactly
that,
what happened. And so the letters started, and of course it was difficult to make a steady communication because they were being censored, they were going here, they were going there, they were being travelled. So what happened was there were two lots of letters, one lot which is Kathleen writing to David and one lot that's David writing to Kathleen, and they're not actually in sequence.
Right,
Excuse me. And Mark had originally the letters.
So they're kind of standalone letters, if you like. They don't necessarily answer, because I mean, we remember writing letters before email, don't we? I mean, there's something you used to do with your closest friends and relatives, and you would answer and tell more, and then the person would answer and tell more. But you're saying these are kind of standalone letters that they receive, and they've probably sent them at the same time or at different times, and the other ones haven't come, or they come in a bundle, this kind of thing. So they're like reports more than anything.
In a way, especially at the beginning, because they didn't know each other the way they'd known them as children. And so they were giving each other information about their lives and who they were and what they were doing. And Kathleen was clearly hesitant in the first letter and hoping that she'd be in touch. But when we got them all, years later, Mark had his father's letters for a long time. And Kathleen one day came to me and gave me an envelope. She said, I've got this for you. She said, and I don't want you to open it now. Wait till you get home and it'll make sense to you when you get home. Mark's got the rest of it. And I hadn't a clue what she was talking about, of course. Got home, and that weekend, we spent the whole weekend going through them and putting them together. Reading and trying to get some sense of order to them to see what this story was, which was a great surprise to us.
Very exciting too.
And very exciting. Yeah. And we later then transcribed every single one.
Well, very
because
good.
They were almost
they're historical
documents,
aren't they? I mean, they sound like they're a very interesting love story of correspondence.
It was.
I mean, obviously important because
it was the backstory.
Yeah. I mean, it's maybe that's why. Maybe I don't know. David thought he was writing his life story later on. Maybe he thought it was time to tie it all up. No, that's amazing. I mean, and you've documented them, so they're there for history.
Yeah,
which is very, very important.
Yeah, we did it for the family, really, didn't we?
And as an aside, one of our big questions, which we can't answer yet, is what are we going to do with the letters? Because the children won't want them.
They've already told us they don't.
But that's another matter.
Maybe the archives in Margaret will take them.
They've got them. They've got them. Copies, they've got scans, and they've got the text. And in Barcelona, we've already shared
and
that.
Santa Coloma.
And Santa Coloma, the three. We've already shared that.
Cool.
Anyway,
so
you got back to England.
Yeah. So tell me what. Yeah. Well, I mean, he must have been affected, eh?
Yes.
He was. We have press cuttings from the local paper in Edmonton. Saying that David Newman had returned from Spain, and there was some discussion, some of it in the press, about whether or not he would be allowed to go back to his old job, which he was. And so he became, again, a clerk in the local government of Edmonton, the Borough Council. And
so, I mean, we have to remember that although there was a lot of people that went and fought for the international brigades, when you spread it across the world, there are not a lot of people. So Edmonton had a few, and so he was in some ways very notorietable, if that's the correct word. I don't think it is. But he was, notorious. That's the one. Yeah. So he comes back and he's news basically. And they're talking about whether he should even have his job. So he's like, that's quite interesting, no? But he gets his job. I mean, one presumes.
Oh yes, yeah. And then
and what he did do when he although he was working for the local council, and there'd been this debate about whether he should be employed again, but in fact he carried on working for the appeal for Spain, the help aid to Spain, and that was quite interesting because that involved him quite a lot in what was still going on. And of course, at that time, there was the retirada had started and people were fleeing and Franco was taking over. And so it was quite an interesting thing. And Kathleen got into trouble with her mum when it was found out that she was helping David to distribute the leaflets and do all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, we have to remember all this history is real lives doing things. And people get upset with people, and there's the conflict is reflected in human stories, and there they are, getting in trouble. So, what did your dad do with his life after the experience of going to Spain? Because like we said before, he hadn't been long in work. He'd gone there. He'd seen a lot. I mean, not just it wasn't on the front in that way, but he'd seen a lot from his position he was in. He'd been quite unwell. He comes back with this massive experience. How does that shape the rest of his life, do you think?
Well, I think the short answer to that is, of course, is that the war was declared, and he was called up. And he was based primarily in Catterick. God, Catterick, I can't spell. Catterick. Again, in communications and
worked for the signals.
And signals. And it was while he was there that his lung collapsed. One of his lungs collapsed. And although I've got no direct medical knowledge of it, what Kathleen always said was that she had been told by medical staff that his lung collapsed because when he was part of the torpedoing of the Ciudad de Barcelona, he ingested some grit close to shore. There would have been a lot of sand, in the water.
Yes.
And as a result of that, something must have lodged in his lung and wore a hole in it, and his lung collapsed. At which point, of course, he became useless as a soldier, and he was invalided out of the army, and went back to work in local government.
He was in hospital for quite a while, wasn't he? When with this problem with his lung, that was
So in some ways, in some ways, the Ciudad de Barcelona, although it almost killed him, actually, because of the illness, it did eventually kill him, but because of the illness it caused, it took him out of some of the other flashpoints, let's say, where a lot of people did die.
Oh, yeah.
So unfortunate in many ways, but actually has a positive, I suppose is the wrong word, but you know what I'm saying. He manages to avoid.
I probably wouldn't. Yeah.
Yeah, well, then it's good, then, isn't it? Ciudad de Barcelona is a very positive event on one angle. So there he is.
Anyway, and from working in the local government in Edmonton, he then applied for a job as an area organizer for NALGO, National Association of Local Government.
And for people who don't know, NALGO eventually became the central part or a big part of Unison, the big union that's in the UK.
That's right. Oh, yes, very much.
One of the biggest unions in the UK. Absolutely. So NALGO was the local government's wing of that, wasn't it? Not.
Yeah.
Okay, so he starts working for a trade union.
Yeah, effectively. By that time, of course, he and Kathleen were married. I was around. My sister Linda arrived in 1945, and Chris a lot later. And we were all living in Reading, where he was based. The house, Tilehurst Road, had the NALGO offices in it. Which way we had the flat above the office.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And then why that changed, I've never been sure, but he applied for a job working for the Sudan government.
Okay.
And in 1949, we moved to Khartoum.
Okay, wow, that's a big change to take your family, yeah?
But it was effectively the same thing. It was the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan at that point, of course. And again, he was based in local government, you know.
So do you think he's got a...
So there's a thread going...
Yeah, there's a thread of sort of getting out into the rest of the world going on here, isn't there? I mean, it's world events are taking place, you know, but actually some choices are made because you don't just live in Edmonton in this position. His mind is in the world.
No. Yeah.
Okay, so you end up in Sudan for a while.
Absolutely.
Then what takes place?
3 years. Well, it then becomes very interesting because we moved back to the UK in 1952. Yes, 1952. When Chris because Chris was on the way, and he at that point we know he became very involved in politics. And he also did a period working as a bricklayer because he was told, we believe, by somebody in the Labour Party that if he wanted to get really involved, he had to have direct experience of manual labour, which he'd never had.
Very good.
And whether that's true
I agree with that philosophy, by the way, as a manual worker.
Yeah.
These office types don't really know what's going on. Get them on building site, that'll sort them out.
And then in 1954, when we were by then living in Stevenage, he then got a job with the ICFTU, International Confederation of Free Trades Unions. It's not called that now. It has another set of initials. That was based in Brussels.
Okay, so again, we've got this international thing.
Absolutely. And he, for the next 5 years, he was basically away abroad, and he went all over the world organizing. He was called officially a roving ambassador for the ICFTU.
Do you think a lot of that comes because he was a brigader? I mean, sometimes when they look at your CV, and they look at, I mean, maybe they don't put it on, but it's clearly he's thinking, well, I was one of those ones, and they're heroes, hey. And so the trade union movement are going to say, well, this guy he's got what it takes to go around the world building.
Absolutely. Oh yes. Oh yeah. Very, very, very likely, I think. And anyway, for that, he was in Taiwan. He went to Korea, and by that time, happily, he had bought himself a camera, and we have a lot of images showing what he was up to. I did an exhibition here. We did an exhibition here in the Mary of David and his photography, and went down very, very well. Particularly the photos of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Well, it was timed with the Hiroshima.
Next time I'll see you, we'll have a look through them. Maybe.
Oh, absolutely. So he worked for the ICFTU, becoming more involved with the Labour Party, and he moved back to England in 1957, 56.
I don't know.
56, 57. And that was the point when he did the manual labour, working as a brickier or bricklayer's mate. And became very, very involved politically with the Labour Party, applied for and was accepted as parliamentary candidate for the Labour Party for Mid-Bedfordshire.
Okay.
Now, one of the interesting things about his time abroad in India was that he was challenged to go and see a soothsayer, a fortune teller, because he never believed in anything like that. He wasn't a religious person. And one of the things that this fortune teller told him was that he would be the leader of his people. Now, interpret that how you will. He was adopted as a Labour Party candidate for Mid-Beds, and unfortunately, he had an affair with my mother's best friend.
Okay, so there's another pattern maybe here.
Not bright.
Well, anyway, and he resigned. He didn't become an MP. Who knows what would have happened if he had? Because that election, the constituency was won by the Labour candidate, his replacement.
Right.
We instead moved to Leeds, because he became effectively, what was his title? He was effectively Chief Personnel Officer for Leeds Corporation.
Forgotten the title.
Again, and we have booklets that he wrote for, induction of workers again, organising labour. It was always the same thread going through the whole thing. Then in 1961, which was the end of it, 5 men of a similar age caught a virus, pericarditis, inflammation of the heart muscle, and uncomfortable, very, but not necessarily fatal. 4 of them recovered. My father didn't, because he had been a heavy smoker all his life in spite of his lung, and with the virus, he caught pneumonia, and it was the pneumonia that killed him, which is why we go right back to Malgrat and say, basically, although he wasn't a casualty directly of the boat sinking, he was indirectly a casualty many years later, And I do regret bitterly that I didn't have a chance to talk to him about all this. As I said, that you remember that meeting at in Malgrat with the children, and I said, students, sorry, whatever you do, talk to your grandparents about them. Tell them to keep letters. Don't throw anything away.
I mean, it kind of brings me on to this final thing I want to ask you, really, because it's not just talking to your family, is it? It's not just talking to the people you know. It's actually everybody talking about this. I mean, obviously talking to your personal relationships, and my father's very old at the moment, and I have spoken to him. I spent that time a number of years ago. It felt important, but that's on the personal level. But on the historical level, your father is a relative to all of us, because he becomes a figure, in an important historical event, which is still relevant for today, because obviously the struggle against the far right hasn't finished, and we're still in that battle in quite a big way. And so, I mean, my final question is, what do you think the legacy of your father, of the International Brigades and the historical memory, what does it represent for you? What do you think is important about that issue?
Well, I'm very proud of him. More so in the last few years since we really began to get into it. And I think that he didn't contribute as much as he could have done if things had turned out differently. I mean, becoming an MP, for example, and becoming the leader of his people. I mean, who knows? Who knows? I know that he was always committed and anti-fascism, far-right politics. He had no part of it. My mother, incidentally, was also a Labour Party county councillor while we were living in Stevenage. And so, again, the
influence.
I've always been on the left, obviously, no chance of anything else. And he would have been, I'm sure, delighted by the Malgrat, the Solidarity Park. He would have loved that, absolutely loved it. And it's such a shame that, he would have been far too old, of course, but nevertheless, the idea of it would have appealed enormously as a...
Just never forget.
So, and making sure that people remember, and as you say, the problem with the far right in many countries now, it's got to be fought against. It has to be fought against. Here in France, we have some very doubtful people going for president next year. Eric Zemmour, I think his name is.
Don't give him the space.
No, but it's indicative, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is indicative.
I think it's. Well, I think it would be true enough to say that he was a leader of his people. I mean, maybe not the parliamentary candidate, maybe not on the front, but actually we're doing this interview because he's important. He's one of our leaders. I mean, and I believe that leaders aren't always the people who are making the decisions at the front. Leaders are the people who give the inspiration, and what we need today is people who give inspirational lead, so in a sense, I think the soothsayer in India was correct. He did lead he did lead his people.
I think on that one, I would probably think, because of course I never knew him at all, and so I've come to him through his own words, through his own writing, and the family connection, but his work with ICFTU impressed me hugely. I suppose because we had photographs from, and he was in India, he was in Africa, both East and West Africa. He was all over the place, and he met some really influential people. I mean, Pandit Nehru, we photographs of him with Pandit Nehru and his wife, people in Japan, people in Africa. And at all that time, he was training people in the ethos of trade unionism, setting up trade unions, setting up work environments. And he was doing that as an individual, but with that background. When in Spain, he was with all these people from all over the world, as we know. We know more now than we did at the time. The people from every country, every background, and they were united in what they were trying to do. And I think he maybe was trying to get that message in his work abroad, because he was very, very, I think he was really highly thought of.
We mentioned Nehru. A good example. Nehru, of course, went to Spain. He was in Spain during the war. I think he's in one of Paul Preston's books.
Yes, he is.
And one of the interesting things is that when David was working in India, we have photographs of him with Nehru. And my mum had said to David, "Would you buy some flowers and give them to him?" And we have a photograph of the flowers being held by Nehru. Now, the interesting thing is, he was President of India, highly important person. David was important in what he was doing, but how come he got an interview with Nehru?
Went home for tea.
Did he went home for tea?
Well, he obviously had something about him. He obviously knew how to put himself about. I mean, I think there's an indication here in this interview.
Did he meet Nehru? Did he meet Nehru in Spain?
Met Paul Robeson.
We don't know. We met Paul Robeson. We know that. And at this time of year, we particularly think about all this, because we have a Christmas card, which was signed by Paul Robeson and a number of lots of other brigaders.
The brigaders.
All the brigaders.
Wonderful.
And, yes, he is much missed still, so.
Well, I think we've covered quite a lot of ground there. Hopefully we've recorded it for prosperity to go with the letters, throw in a couple of podcasts. I thank you very much for your time, sharing your family history. Of course, it's your family history, but it's also our family history. It's the great family. I think
that's a nice thought.
Yeah, I think it's the way to. I think it's the way to embrace these leaders, unknown leaders, if you like, of our movement, in the wider sense, in the struggle against fascism and the labour movement in general. Because David was obviously, very committed to the labour movement and the workers' movement in the trade union. So I think. I think that's got to be noted as, somebody that dedicates their life, not just to going to Spain, but dedicates their life in general to the betterment of people's conditions, on a small, on the immediate in the front, when you go to work, So thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you, hopefully in May.
Yes, indeed.
And if not, then, every year afterwards, because we hope to have an annual event now.
For as long as possible, absolutely.
And on that respect, the brigaders, as a body of people, are still bringing people together from all around the world.
Yes, exactly what they're doing. So the internationalism the internationalism was there is one of the key things that we have to hold on to. That international solidarity and and looking for a socialist world is what they fought for, and that's what we need to fight for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, I wish you the best, and we'll speak again soon. Okay?
Yeah, hopefully.
Happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas.
Yeah, and to yourself. Bye now.
Take care.
We hope you enjoyed the show. If you have something to say to us, then join our Facebook group or contact us at outaspace.com. That's outa-space.com. See you soon.